Hi, my name is Ken.
And my name is Jason.
And today we're playing Puerto Rico. Is a worker placement game made by Andrew Seyfarth, designed in about 2001. I believe it's been reprinted since then. I think this is the reprinted version.
Yeah. And in Puerto Rico, players take on different roles throughout the game to manage the island of Puerto Rico, the city of San Juan, and their own plantations.
Roles give players an edge in the game. They actually give them special abilities that allow them to cut ahead of the rest of the players. So without any further ado, let's check out Puerto Rico. So let's take a walk through the components to Puerto Rico. So first we're going to run down the components of Puerto Rico. Here we have the main board, and here we have the player boards. Now there may be different versions of this, but if you're lucky enough to have the version that has this plastic insert, you're pretty lucky. Except if you turn it on its side, then it all goes to heck. But if you do have this, then you're pretty lucky. So I'm just going to present it from this box. Here we have the governor card and the role cards. These are pretty much the meat of the game. So these are going to be very important, but we'll explain those shortly. These are some of the various building tiles in the game. These are some of the various island tiles. Here we have the colonist ship, the trading house, and an example of one of the cargo ships. These are the doubloons. They come in 1 and 5. These are the victory points. They also come in 1 and 5. These nice little fellows are your colonists. And these are the various goods in the game.
So, first of all, let's get set up. The first thing you want to do is place the game board in the center. Next, place all of the buildings in their assigned locations and place all doubloons on the assigned space. Next, each player receives a number of doubloons based on the number of players. So, since this is a minimum of 3 players, we're actually going to have Ken play 2 players. So, that means we have a total of 3. So each player gets 2 doubloons. If there were 4, we would give out 3, and if there were 5, we would give out 4. Next, you count out a number of victory points based on the number of players. So for 3 players it's 75, for 4 players it's 100, and for 5 players it's 122. Next, you place all 8 quarries near the plantation tiles. You also place the trading house along with all of the goods. You also place a number of role cards based on the number of players. So the difference here is that with 3 players there are no prospectors, with 4 players there is 1 prospector, and with 5 players there are 2 prospectors. All of the other role cards are used regardless. You then select 3 cargo ships determined by the number of players. So for 3 players we're going to be using the 4, 5, and 6 slot ships. For 4 players you would use 5, 6, and 7. For 5 you would use 6, 7, and 8. You then have to count out a number of colonists determined by the number of players. For 3 players it's going to be 55. For 4 it would be 75, and for 5 it is 95. These are placed over here by the goods. You also take the colonist ship card, place that out, and place on it colonists equal to the number of players. So in this case, 3. Next, we determine the starting player randomly. So, Dungeon Quest Combat?
Dungeon Quest Combat. Ha! Hoo! Ha! Ha! Hoo! Ha! Ha! Hoo! Ha! Psh! Ha! Hoo! Ha! Ha! Hoo! Ha! Ha! Hoo! Ha! Ha! Hoo! Ha! Ah!
Alright.
So this, Ken, is the starting player. I will take my governor token, please.
So yes, that person gets the governor tile and an indigo tile. So hand out a player board to each player, and the indigo tile is going to go on that player board. When you're playing with 3 players, as we are, the second player gets an indigo as well, and the third player gets a corn. If you're playing with 4 players, the second player gets indigo, and the third and fourth players get corn. With 5 players, the second and third players get indigo, and the fourth and fifth get corn. Next, shuffle the remaining plantation tiles and place them in 5 face-down stacks. Then you reveal players plus 1 tiles. Anything unused goes back in the box. And now you're ready to play.
Turns in Puerto Rico are fairly simple, as in to explain how to actually go through the turn structure. There's not really a phases sort of thing, because everything kind of happens a little simultaneously. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So starting with the governor, each player picks a role. When a player chooses their role card, starting with that player, you then go in clockwise order around the board, everybody performing the action associated with that role card. However, the person that took the role card actually gets a bonus to doing that role. So say for an example here, I took the builder. This means that starting with me, every one of us would have a chance to build one of the places in the center here. However, because I was the one that took the builder in this case, these buildings would cost one less doubloon. After everyone takes the associated action, the turn goes to the next person, they choose one of the roles, and then starting with them, we go clockwise and everyone takes that action again, and they apply their perk as they're doing it. After each player has taken a role, we then take some doubloons from the bank and place one on every unused role card. In subsequent turns, if you take a role that has a doubloon on it, you actually get that doubloon for yourself. So sometimes, if an action isn't something you may want to take but has a lot of doubloons on it, that might be something you want to do. After you do that, the governor token passes to the next player, the roles are returned, and you start that rotation all over again. So that's pretty simple. The next thing I'm going to actually explain is how the individual roles work, because that is where the core of the game actually happens. So first off, we're going to explain the settler. When a player takes a settler role, each player may take a face-up plantation from those that are, well, face-up by the plantation piles, and places it on their island. However, the player that took the settler action may instead choose to take a quarry token instead of one of the actual island tiles listed over there. The remaining island tiles are discarded nearby, and then reveal one for each player, and then +1. These will be the new tiles available for the next time the settler action comes up again. Next we're going to explain the mayor. Starting with the player that took the mayor action, colonists are placed onto the windrows on the player's sheets. This is done until there are no longer any left on the actual colonist ship tile. In addition to that, the mayor, the person who chose the mayor action rather, gets one additional colonist from the supply. After everyone has taken their colonists, players may then place their colonists on their sheet as workers. Any unassigned colonists actually go place on your San Juan location of your board. They may be placed in subsequent mayor turns, and in addition, if going into a turn with the mayor, you had any in there, they would also be able to be placed during that point as well. Then, as his final duty, the mayor has to place new colonists on the colonist ship. The mayor looks at everyone's buildings in play and counts up the amount of unused locations. Now in this case, at this point of the example, none of us actually have buildings yet because I haven't gone over the building action yet. So in this case, if that happened, you still put a minimum of the number of players onto the colonist ship. So in this case, 3. So that means that regardless, there would always be at least the amount of players worth of colonists on the colonist ship. However, say for example, this player had these 2 buildings on their sheet. So we have 2 indigo plants here, both of which require 3 colonists each. We would then count out 6 colonists and place those on the colonist ship instead. Next, we'll explain the builder. This is a pretty simple one. I already kind of touched on this, but let's just go through it again. Starting with the player who took the builder, each player may build one of these buildings and place it on their island. If a player has a quarry that is occupied, they may actually reduce the cost by the amount listed at the top here. This is where the builder action gets a little complex, but just follow me along and hopefully you'll get it with me. So in order to reduce the building cost, you can have up to the listed amount of quarries and they have to be occupied. So say for example if I wanted to reduce the building cost of a small indigo plant, which is in the first column here. If I had 1 occupied quarry, that will reduce the building cost by 1. In this case, that will reduce it to 0. However, even if I had 2 occupied quarries, I could still only reduce it by a maximum of 1 point, because that's how many quarry icons are listed at the top of this row. So everything in this row can only be ever reduced by a maximum of 1, in this one 2, this one 3, and this one 4. But you have to have occupied quarries up to that listed amount to get the benefit. However, even over here, if I only had 1 occupied quarry, I could still reduce the cost by 1. I don't have to have all 4 of them to reduce the cost. It just means that an upwards of 4 can be reduced. Each player may only build one building during this phase, and the builder, nice and simple, reduces the cost to build buildings by 1, so that's in addition to the quarries. Next we're going to go over the craftsman. Craftsman is also pretty simple. During the craftsman turn, take goods from the supply equal to your production amounts. So in the setup we have right now, this player would receive 1 indigo, this player would receive a sugar and an indigo, and this player would receive 1 indigo. Production amounts only come from occupied plantation tiles. An important thing to note when taking the craftsman ability, when you're producing goods, you have to have a plantation, but you also have to have a corresponding production plant as well. So say if I wanted to harvest this indigo, I would have to have a small indigo plant, and both of those would have to be occupied in order for me to produce 1 indigo. Alternatively, if I had this 3-section indigo plant, this means that by having 3 different people on here, I could actually process 3 different indigo fields, if it was properly manned by your colonists and such. If you don't have the corresponding plant, you cannot produce those goods, even with the craftsman ability. There is no production plant for corn, therefore corn can just be produced during this phase without any production plant, as long as you have the field manned. The craftsman, as their perk though, can take 1 additional good of any type that they could produce. So they are still limited by whether or not they have occupied or unoccupied plantations. But they produce 1 additional one of a type that they have produced this turn. Next we have the trader. Starting with the player who took the trader card, each player takes a good from their supply and puts it in the trading house. They then receive the listed amount of doubloons and place that in their inventory. Continue until all players have either had a chance to sell at the trading house, or until the trading house is full. This means you can only actually place one good in the trading house when the trader action is taken. The player that took the trading action, though, receives 1 additional doubloon when he does so. But he has to trade at least 1 good in order to gain that perk. He doesn't just get 1 for free. If the trading house is full by the end of this phase, clear it. If it's not, keep it. This would make it a little harder to trade things next time around. Now, we're not going to be playing with the Prospector, but I'm just quickly going to explain it before I explain the last roll afterwards. So in higher games, you're going to have 1 or more Prospectors, and when you take the Prospector action, you get 1 doubloon from the bank. Just you. Just the person who took the Prospector action, rather. Often what ends up happening with the Prospectors, it gets overlooked for a while, and then suddenly it has a whole bunch of coins on it, so that's usually when you're going to want to take it. So now we're going to explain the final card, the Captain. The explanation of this is pretty simple, but the execution is a little bit more complex. So I'm going to start at the top. Each player places goods on 1 of the 3 cargo ships until no player has goods that can be placed. Placing goods on these ships is mandatory. So if you have goods and they can be placed based on the rules I'm about to explain, you must place them. So starting with the player who took the captain action, they choose 1 type of goods that they currently have and place it in 1 of the open cargo ships. And then they receive victory points equal to the amount of barrels that they have loaded. It doesn't matter what type of resource it is, even if it's a really expensive one, a really awesome one, it still only gives you 1 point per barrel. The person who took the captain action gains 1 more victory point during this turn if they do so. When you collect victory points, they're played face down at your windrows there, so no one can know exactly how much you have. So when we come back around to here, this player also has 2 indigo for this example. When they are placing, they must place it in a ship that has that type of good. They can't start to make a new indigo ship. So that means this player would also receive 2. This player only has 1 sugar. Sugar's a little bit more valuable than the indigo that's been placed out, but they still have to place it. They don't have a choice. So they can choose to place in either one of these. And they would only receive 1 victory point for it, even though it's a little bit more valuable than indigo on its own. So let's say another player had 1 indigo remaining, so this last player that had the sugar. The other 2 players don't have anything left, so we're just going to skip over them for this example. They cannot place this indigo on a completed ship. So in this case, this ship has 4 indigo on it, which is the maximum it can hold. No more indigo can be placed. They can choose to place it on another empty ship if there isn't already 2 other ships that have that same type of good. So not all 3 ships can have the same type of good, but up to 2 can. So in this case, 1 indigo could be placed here for 1 additional victory point. After all players receive their victory points, we then go over to what we do with the leftover goods, if you have any. With leftover goods, first off, 1 good can be stored on your player board on the windrow, so you can always keep one between turns if you like, assuming you weren't forced to carry it onto the ship. You also may have several different warehouses, and those can store as well. However, anything you cannot store is actually returned back to the supply, so these things are spoiled, is how it refers to it. Also, technically, storing is mandatory, but it's also kind of your best interest to store as much as you can in between turns anyway, so I can't imagine a situation where you wouldn't really want to do that. But hey, maybe there's some time when you might want to, but you can't, because it's mandatory. The other thing I could explain at this point are the buildings, but there's a lot of them, and honestly, they're pretty self-explanatory. I don't think that there's anything in the buildings that's such a trip up that you would really need me to go over it. And if you do have a problem with any of the buildings, the instruction manual has a very good explanation of each one of them. So, I mean, they're all fairly well explained. You can kind of figure that out. You're probably a smart cookie. The last thing we're going to go over is ending the game. So the end of the game occurs when there are not enough colonists to fill the colonist ship at the end of a mayor's turn. If any player builds their 12th city space, so they have all 12 spaces on their city complete, or there are no more victory points remaining at the end of the captain's phase. As a note though, if you do run out of victory points are not exhaustive, they just note the end of the game. So you would then actually track further victory points accumulated on paper or using some other method, however you choose. So on a turn that any one of those three conditions are met, that is the very last turn of the game. You still complete the whole round, but any one of those three is the end of the game. Scoring goes as follows. The value of your listed victory point chips, the VP value of your buildings, noted in the top corner here. The large buildings also have a second VP condition wherein you actually gain victory points based on certain conditions on the card, but you only gain that amount if you have those conditions, of course, and if the building is occupied. So if it's unoccupied, you don't gain anything. You still get the 4 victory points for having it, though. And then simply add up your victory points, and the person with the highest amount of victory points wins. If there happens to be a tie, the tie goes to the person with the most doubloons, and if there's still a tie after that, then, well, it's up to your choice whether or not you want to share the victory or randomize it, but sharing the victory sounds good then. So that's it. Now we're going to show you some example turns. Alright, we're going to go through example turns for Puerto Rico. So, starting with the governor, which is one of my players, I'm going to choose to take the building action. So, starting with me, I get to make a building. I'm going to choose to take a construction hut, and I'm going to pay 1 for that instead of 2, because I took the building action. Now, the second Kenny gets to go. Going to choose to pay 1 to get a small market.
And I'm going to choose to buy a hacienda for 2.
Now, as a note, these buildings all have certain effects, but they only take place if you actually have colonists on the location, and none of us do right now. So, that's all 3 of those. There's nothing left to do with the cleanup for our building phase, so we go into the next Kenny's turn.
Ken 2D2.
Ken 2D2. And they're going to choose the mayor. So, they get 1 colonist from the supply, and then they take 1 colonist from the ships.
I'm going to then take a colonist from the ship.
And original Ken takes 1 colonist from the ship. Then we can all place our colonists. At the end of the mayor's phase, we count the number of buildings with unoccupied locations, and currently we all have buildings, but none of us actually have any locations that are unoccupied. So we then put our default of 3 tokens on the colonist ship. Jason, it is now your choice to pick a role.
At this point, I think I'm going to choose the settler.
Alright, so the settler may choose one quarry instead of a plantation.
Because I have a colonist on my hacienda, I actually get to, first of all, take a face-down tile. It happens to be indigo plantation. So I get that. Then I get to take 1 as normal. Now, because I have chosen the settler action, I can actually take a quarry instead of plantation. I think I'm going to do that at this point.
Now Vanilla Ken gets to take his turn. Vanilla Ken has taken a construction hut, which allows him to take a quarry instead of a plantation during the settler phase. And he's going to choose to do that. And Ken 2D2 is going to take a plantation, noting that everyone has overlooked these nice coffees over here, and places it in his island. Since we've all had a turn, the remaining tokens are discarded, and then we draw more equal to the number of players plus 1. So now that we've all chosen a roll card, we're at the end of the round. So at the end of the round, the governor takes 1 doubloon, and places it on every single roll that has not been chosen. The rolls are then returned back to the supply. And then the governor title passes to the next player. Alright, so we're starting a new round. The governor's going to choose to take the mayor. So they get 1 extra from the supply, and then take 1 from the colonist ship.
I get 1 from the colonist ship.
And Vanilla Ken also gets 1 from the colonist ship. Then the mayor counts up the number of unused buildings, and like last time, there are none. So we put the default amount of 3 on the colonist ship. Each player may then place one of the colonists in their locations, and any unused locations go to San Juan. So I kind of skipped ahead a little bit here, and the colonist ship has 3 on it, because we all have buildings, but none of them are unused, so we just go with the default amount of 3. So, moving right along. Jason, your next turn.
I think I'm going to go with the craftsman.
So you get 1 special doubloon here, and you get to take the craftsman action.
So, since I have a person on the cornfield here, I am going to get 1 corn of goods. In addition, because I chose the craftsman action, I actually get 1 more good, and so I get an additional corn.
So Vanilla Ken doesn't actually have any goods that they can pull. However, because Ken 2D2 does not actually have any processing plants for their various goods, they actually do not produce any goods. Alright, so that is the craftsman turn, nice and simple. Now we go to Vanilla Ken. He gets to choose, and he's going to choose to take the building action. So because I took the building action, buildings are going to cost 1 less doubloon for me. However, I also have an occupied quarry. So this means that buildings are actually going to cost 2 less for me. So for that, I'm going to take an indigo plant for free. Ken 2D2 can only afford a small indigo plant, and will choose to take that.
That is probably a good thing for him to have, though.
Indeed.
And I am also going to take a small indigo plant, because I feel I should probably have that so that I can use that indigo field.
Alright, that's the builder phase, and that has been all the rolls taken again. So, the governor takes doubloons and places them on each of the unused rolls. The rolls are then returned back to the bank, and then the governor tile is passed to the next player. And that's it for example turns for Puerto Rico.
So Ken, what do you think of Puerto Rico?
Well, okay, I think we may end up having somewhat of a controversial opinion on this, but I like Puerto Rico, and I think it's a very solid game. However, it's starting to show its age a little bit, and I think for the most part, there's a lot of games that have learned from Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
And have done the things that Puerto Rico has done, and built upon it, and has made it excellent. But looking at Puerto Rico now, like knowing all the other things I have on my shelf, I'm going to have to say I'm going to have to give Puerto Rico a 2.5 out of 5 meeples. It's not to say it's a bad game, it's just that nowadays I kind of feel like it's middle of the road. And this is why I think that our opinion, Jason's going to have a somewhat similar opinion to mine, but just don't turn off the video yet, and don't thumbs us down into oblivion. Just hear us out here. So, this is a bit of an older game. It's sort of similar to, say, Settlers of Catan.
Yeah.
In that, like, this is a trailblazer for the current state of board games. Like, this game is 13 years old now? Almost 13 years old now, I would say. Yeah, about 13 years old. I mean, that's pretty old by board game standards in our age. Like, we're used to games coming out, like, so frequently, all the time, every year. And, yeah, I feel like, well, once you set up the game, you kind of know what's going to happen. Like, you already sort of know who's going to take it.
Well, yeah, with experienced players especially, it kind of gets to the point where, you know, there's just a certain order of rolls that you take. And if you take all those rolls in the correct order, then you just win.
And I mean, there is a human element to it, too.
There is.
And there's a random element to it as well.
Yeah, but
it's not much, though.
For the most part, it's just, you know, like that whole stereotypical, you know, chess joke where the 2 players are sitting down, one person just moves the first pawn, and the other one says, you know, checkmate in 20 moves. Like, if everybody knows how the game works, then that's essentially what it is. You can set the game up, you can figure out who the first player is, and just basically say, okay, you win, good game.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't again, we're not trying to bash Puerto Rico, because I would still say it's a great game. It's just that it's just not as good as other options. There's other things I'd want to play, basically. Like, if someone said, hey, do you want to play Puerto Rico? I would say, I don't know, maybe I'm kind of feeling like a Agricola. Probably take roughly around the same amount of time. I feel like I get a little bit more enjoyment out of it. I feel like I don't have it's weird because I simultaneously in Puerto Rico feel like I have too much control and yet at the same time not enough control. So I feel like you have all the control in the world in this game. Like it's very, like everything is available to you. You just have to get things in the right order. But if someone else gets them in the right order before you, then like, well, GG. But there's not really a whole lot of room for error, I don't find. Like, there are a lot of different ways to win. Like, the way that the buildings work, like, the higher level buildings are really neat because they add a different sort of level of strategy, and that is kind of fundamentally where the strategy goes. But to new players, I don't know if that's necessarily going to be a priority. I mean, if you're already fairly adept with board gaming in general, you may end up finding a lot of fun in this game the first time you play it and such. It doesn't replay very well for me though. I guess if you had a group of folks that you just got together and you played Puerto Rico, that would probably be pretty fun because, you know, if you're all really good at it, then you're going to stay on even footing. But I feel like if one player knows the game better than anyone else, like one player is teaching everyone else the game at the table, I feel like odds are sort of stacked in their favor. It's one of those games where if you know the strategy of the game, you're probably going to dominate basically every time, especially against people who aren't as familiar with said strategies. Yeah. What else do you have to say?
Well, I'm going to also give it 2.5 out of 5. I don't think there's a whole lot else that I can say about it. I think we've pretty much covered everything. But yeah, I just, you know, I think it was an important game sort of in the history of board games, but I think it's kind of dated at this point, and I really do feel that it's kind of just too predictable in the outcome. So.
Yeah. Well, that is going to give us a grand total of 5 meeples, which is not bad. It's middle of the road, and I kind of feel like at this point in time, I hope there are some folks that agree with us and don't think that we're trying to shatter any sort of illusions about this being an excellent game. It is still a great game. It's just that there are other games we'd rather play nowadays. Well, that was Puerto Rico. Join us next time. Until then, see you later. Have good games.